Hey, what's going on, boys? It is day number 63 of reading through the book of Isaiah. Today, we're going to be looking at a pretty short passage talking about praise and prayer. Actually, the main topic of this chapter is called God's Day of Vengeance and Redemption, but I want to go ahead and skip ahead a little bit to from verse 7 all the way until it's actually going to run into tomorrow's writings. But for today, I want to look at a pretty interesting section that Isaiah is going to write down. And I think the way that it's translated to kind of modern day text is into a question that a lot of us ask ourselves. And I'll get into that question here in just a minute. But I think there's a word that can kind of define this entirety of this chapter, and that is the word guidance. Guidance is something that does not come naturally to us. Guidance is something that we have to earn from God. And reason being is that, when we were born and go into this world, we're constantly looking around, trying to find answers to problems and exploring all new things, trying new things. But a lot of us who don't have that primary source to build off of do not, go in a, certain path that we should be. What happens is that, when you don't plant your feet, when you don't have a good foundation, what you're trying to do with something, you end up finding yourself being all over the place. And that's, believe I, where God steps in and he helps you with that. Verses 11 through 14 says, "Then his people were called the days of old, the days of Moses and his people. Where is he who brought them through the sea, with the shepherd of his flock? Where is he who set his Holy Spirit among them, who sent his glorious arm of power to be at Moses' right hand, who divided the waters before them and gained himself everlasting renown, who led them through the depths like a horse in open country? They did not stumble, like cattle that did not go down to the plain. They were given rest by the Spirit of the Lord. This is how you guided your people and make yourself a glorious name." So God calls you into his presence to learn how to lead and listen. Two L words: lead and listen. Very much important. And what's interesting is that, I love how, it starts off with this. It says the people recalled. They recalled back. Now, we've talked about a little bit over the past couple of days that, when you're looking back into your past, you have to be careful, because when you start focusing on the past more than you should be, you start finding yourself getting upset and angry and depressed, and you might even find yourself even a lot worse. But I believe what God wants us to do is he wants us to recall on the times that we succeeded well, and he wants us to build off of that. Recall back to the times that we heard God speak to us and we were thriving off of it, and go back to the point where we fell, and go back to the point before where you were constantly moving. Think of it as like a roller coaster. You have the lift hill, and then it drops and just keeps going. Think of it as, you recall back to a previous moment in your life, whether that was, a certain thing with your job or with a person or whatever it is. Think of that lift hill. The lift hill is just constantly just going up and down. Whereas this time you recall back to it, and now you're going up, but instead of going over a peak and dropping back down again, you say, okay, what if I just make this lift hill infinite and I just keep going up? So you're constantly still going up and up and up and up and up. So it may sound weird. I know that's not really a great kind of analogy of that, but just bear with me. Most of us, reflect back and look back at all the negatives in our lives, but I promise you there's a lot of good positives in here. And with this case, they're referring back to Moses when he parted the Red Sea. And he's like, okay, it's like, where's the God who did this for Moses back then? Where's the God who did this for the people that Moses led? He led the Israelites into the promised land. What about where's this God? What's going on here? And I believe that, God is always constantly with us. And sometimes the reason why we feel like he's far away is because we don't seek him. We're not putting him first. We're not putting him at the center of attention. We're putting him off to the side. There's another question that gets asked in verse 17 that says, "Why, Lord, do you make us wander from your ways and harden our hearts so we do not revere you?" So I think this is a question that a lot of people will ask, especially people who may have been, maybe church hurt or not sure about Christ, is they're saying, okay, well, if God is so good and so powerful, then why does he allow all these bad things? Why does he let me wander? Why does he let me go into these things? Why am I getting addicted to things? Why am I finding myself here? Why am I going down these paths? Why do I have arguments all the time? And I believe, something that we have to kind of really think about is that the human mind cannot comprehend God's ways. And it's not to say that we're not smart. It's just to say that God is so powerful that our minds can't even physically wrap around it. Our minds can understand that, God can do miracles and this and that, but his ways and his plans, what God thinks, that's not something we can think about. So the only thing we can do is, learn from what God is giving us and make an analogy off that. So to answer that question is that, we go through some tough times. And I believe that the reason why we go through some tough times is to test your faith in him. We know that God can do anything. We know that he can do the impossible. He raised Jesus from the dead. We know that. We know that God is capable of great things. But a lot of us put God as this genie almost to say, hey, this is going on. Why are you not intervening? You should be helping me here. Can you not, save me from this situation? Can you not deliver on my behalf of what I've been going through? And that's where we have to step back and be like, well, that's not who God is. God's not a genie. Well, yes, he can perform miracles and he can do some supernatural things that, we could never imagine. That doesn't make him a, okay, well, whatever these humans tell me to do, I'm just going to do it. No, God is his own individual. He can do whatever he wants. He can wipe out the entirety of the earth if he really wants to, but he doesn't. He doesn't. He knows that humanity is struggling, and he knows that we are sinful beings. And that's why, he chose to send someone to take care of that for us, with that being Jesus. And what's interesting is that, I don't believe that God puts these negative things in our lives to say that the negativity is okay. I believe that he allows certain things to happen for a reason that we just can't understand. And I believe that one day when we get to heaven, we will understand that either God will literally tell us physically, or we'll see it firsthand when we're in heaven, when we look down. Because I do believe that, when you get into heaven, we can still, see what's going on down on the earth. That sounds kind of weird, but I do believe that when we are in heaven, and obviously we are in eternal freedom, but I do believe that we can still look upon the earth. We can look at our families and these people that are still on the earth, but we have no physical way of contacting them. We are this, almost you could say an outside dimension, to be exact, to where I believe that heaven exists, but it doesn't exist in the way that we think it exists. It doesn't exist in 3D or 4D or the way we think it does. I believe it exists outside of time, space, and matter. I was watching this thing by a scientist, and it was talking about, they said, well, how is it possible that God is eternal? Where did God come from? And he said, God has always been. He always was, and he always was, Alpha and Omega. And because God is always there, we know that, there's the three main principles that exist: time, space, and matter. Time being how long, matter being how much, and what's time, space? Yeah. But ultimately, if God, existed inside of these three proper states that we can have identified, he wouldn't be all good. He wouldn't be all powerful. There would be a limitation to his power. But God exists outside of these dimensions and is still able to have a connection on us. He's so powerful that he can work through, almost like breaking the laws of physics. Just understand that, there's all these things that we hear on earth, the laws and where they work and this and that. God can override any one of them. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what you learn in science class or what you learn about a specific thing. God can override it. But he also chooses to keep his distance because he knows that the only way we are going to grow closer to him is when we absolutely build our trust and earn our overall time towards him. God is never running away from us. So I believe that if there's something ever bad happens in your life, don't blame it on God. It's not God's fault. It's not. God does not intend for these things to happen, but they do sometimes. And obviously, we all turn to God because we know that He's the ultimate overseer of everything. So we think, well, if these things are about, why is God not intervening? Why is God allowing these storms to take place? Think about the storms that happen in Texas and West North Carolina. Like, people will always say, well, why would God allow this to happen? And it's like, well, we don't really know. Like, we can't give you a specific answer. Like, we don't have a physical. It's not like we can pick up a phone and be like, oh yeah, God, this and that. It's not really how it works. Like, unfortunately, that's not. We have to, look for signs. I believe that's how God speaks to us, is He, gives us like visual signs. I don't believe that God speaks in His, physical voice, because that's just not how He can communicate with us. I don't believe that's something that we can understand. I believe that He communicates with us through things we see around us, and He speaks through other people. And sometimes it takes a little bit for us to notice that. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of elaborate on that. I know I kind of jumped off topic a little bit, but just know that whatever happens in your life, know that God is always there, and know that God is never leaving you. And sometimes when you think that, God has left you and you think that God has allowed that, I promise you, He's right there with you. Sometimes you just have to continue seeking. Remember that every day is a challenge. Nothing's going to get easier. It's not going to get easier by just expecting God to take care of things without you doing a thing. No, God will take care of it when you start moving and you start working. That's when He'll jump in and say, hey, this is what I'll do. So, but let's finish off with today's daily prayer. We are still in the 365 Power Prayer Sermon. We are on July 29th. Today's title was called Like You See, and the verse connected to it is Psalm chapter 30, verse 2. O Lord my God, I cried to you for help, and you have healed me. Out of the ashes I will one day rise victorious. Until then I will cry out to you to save me from myself and deliver me from this wicked world. If I could see it as you see it, I am sure that my life would be different. My approach to sin and my understanding of others would change. Open my eyes, Father. Help me to see like you see. Fill my heart with your hate for sin and your love for people. I want my life to reflect yours. I want my soul to be in your mind with yours. So some of us have people that we look up to and try to live our lives after. And I think that the most important figure that we can live our lives after is Jesus. And the only way we can do that is to deny ourselves and understand that sin is bad. And we have to look at others and love them as we would love ourselves. And understand that people are going through their own challenges, so don't immediately jump to conclusions. I know that's hard. All of us struggle through that, myself included. But the more that we practice with it and the more that we take time and effort to put into it, the more we will start to see change and the more closer we will grow to God. And that is today's word. I hope that you guys have had a great Tuesday and I hope to see you guys very soon. Peace out, boys.